All right, guys, we're going to try to do something this morning that may or may not work. Me and Shay produce a podcast called Marijuana Today. I threw a bunch of stickers on all your tables. It's all SSDP alums primarily that are on the show, and it's a pretty nerdy show about marijuana, business, and politics. A lot of us work in the industry, and we sort of nerd out on who's making money, how the regulations are working, and everything. But we talk a lot about SSDP, so when we got asked to do this panel, we decided to try to record the panel so that we're going to be broadcasting it as an episode. So we're going to start it a little weird. We're going to actually have the whole intro into the panel, but and there's going to be a point really early where I'm going to kick it to you guys. I want to make some noise so everyone who are going to be listening at home. We get not that many listeners. It's pretty brand new, but about 1,500 people will probably check it out. So I want them all to be able to hear that we're at SSDP. And I'm also just excuse myself and make a caveat. I'm going to read some of the segue pieces. So if you see me looking down, that's why. Are we ready to go? Yep. Shay, you got me hearing on this?
You're rolling.
Great. Hello and welcome to episode 13 of Marijuana Today. It's September 28, 2014, and we have a very special episode of the Big MT for you today. You might have heard us bring up Students for Sensible Drug Policy on the show again and again. And today we're going to spend the entire show talking about SSDP and relaying each a piece of our personal history with the organization and hopefully give you a better understanding of why this organization's been so important to us personally and why we think it's been important to the movement. But today we're not just recording for the folks listening on the internet. We're broadcasting from the SSDP International Conference, and we're facing down a horde of hungry, ambitious, and talented student activists who are joining the fight to take apart the drug war. So for quick introductions, at the end of the table, we have Shay Gunther.
Oh, hey, how's it going?
We also have Sean Heller.
Hello, everybody.
Dan Goldman.
Awesome to be here.
Chris Crane.
Hello.
Daisha Costner.
Hello.
And Shalene Tuttle.
Hi.
Okay, so let's talk about how we all got here. The history of SSDP is not a straight narrative. It's a collection of personal histories of hundreds of activists and students who've had their lives and careers changed by coming into contact with our organization. But back in the day, and that day being 1997, drug policy reform was still a fringe issue and just starting to demand serious debate. California had just passed the first medical marijuana law in 1996, and we're starting to get a feeling that things were about to change. Shay, the organization you started at RIT at this point was not even named SSDP yet. How did you go from being the Rochester Cannabis Coalition to being Students for Sensible Drug Policy?
So I started up the first chapter organization that became Students for Sensible Drug Policy. And, sorry. How's that? Does that work? Ooh. Don't know what to do.
Too close to the mixer.
It's working well so far.
Great show.
Good show. Great show.
I'm going to pass that mic over.
Let's try this one. Does that one work?
Okay, here we go.
We're good.
Breaking everything.
That's our engineer.
So embarrassing. All right, guys, fix it in post.
You guys have really come a long way.
All right, Shay, back to you.
Good. We'll do it live. Hello, hello, hello.
No, is that one not working?
No, I don't think so.
Is there a switch on it?
Is this the only one that's working?
Is this one working?
You guys hear me?
No, those are all
Okay, beautiful. So I started basically the precursor to SSDP. We were the Rochester Cannabis Coalition for the first year, and what happened is in the second year we kind of figured out that we needed to be a little bit more expansive. We were basically I want to be normal chapter, and really that first year we kind of figured out that it wasn't just cannabis, it wasn't just marijuana, it was the whole drug war that we really needed to address. And so what happened was the second year of our existence, the officers, we all got together, and Mike Eck, one of the founding officers of the organization, basically said, we need to be for something. We don't want to be an organization against something. We want to be for something. We want it to be positive. And he said, students for sensible drug policy, and it was right away. We all knew that that's who we were. That's who we're going to be, and and that's I think it reflected kind of the new, more expansive focus that SSDP is now.
So this was sort of a defining thing for the organization. I know, we wanted to be something that was dealing with more than marijuana and taking on all of the drug war and prohibition. Now, it probably seems, sort of straightforward here today, the idea that students would want to deal with a broader range of issues. But when we were starting up and first doing this activist, like Normal had been the only org who had any success in having campus chapters, and all the quote-unquote adults, kept telling us that college students were only interested in working on marijuana, and we were just confusing it and distracting people by trying to bring in other things like sentencing reform or talking about needle exchange programs. Now, Shay, we were still really thinking that we were going to be a Normal chapter at this point, and but we started wanting to be some part of something bigger. But your trip down to DC over spring break sort of changed that.
Yeah, so spring of 1998, I didn't have enough money to go to Florida and do the typical spring break thing, so I did the next best thing and went to Washington D.C. and hung out there for a week. So yeah, I stayed on my buddy's dorm room floor and toured all the museums and all that stuff. And the highlight of my week really was visiting the Normal offices. You gotta understand, at this point, I idolized Normal. I read the book High in America, which describes Normal's founding. I thought Normal was the shit. I thought Keith Stropp was awesome. I thought everything that they did was wonderful, and I was really excited about going to visit them. I sat down with Keith, just told him what we're doing at RIT and, how there's all these students excited about, getting involved. And he kind of stepped on my dreams when he told me that, Shay, it's great that you guys are so excited about this, but really it's not until people grow up and get a job and a career that they really can make a difference in the world. And that kind of crushed any chance of us being Normal chapters going ahead. And I mean, I really think that was a pivotal moment for SSDP, because I went back to Rochester saying, all right, well, I guess we're not a Normal chapter. And and then that next year, when Chris moved to DC and kind of took this idea national, we weren't Normal. We were SSDP, and it was because I was told that we weren't capable of making a difference, and that was wrong.
Obviously, we didn't believe that. So,
I do want to say, I think Normal's awesome. I think Keith Stropp is awesome. I don't know if he was having a bad day or what, but yeah.
So because of complications arising from our activism at college, neither Shay or I were going to be welcome back at RIT the next year. I went down to DC for the summer, because that's what cool kids do in 1997. And I was adopted by Dave Borden and Adam Smith, who were running DOTNet. And what Dave and Adam had was they were building one of the first big email lists of all the drug policy reformers. And they had .edu email addresses, so we were actually able to identify students. And, they had been really marshaling support. Troy talked about, during his talk yesterday, about how when we were running into troubles with our university, kids from around the country were starting to reach out to us and offer support, and that was a really big deal. The biggest thing we came out of it was realizing we felt way better being able to interact with other kids and not just getting caught in our microcosm and our battles just at the university. So over the summer, I met a number of young activists who would go on to found the national organization. Alex Kreit was actually in town interning at Normal for that summer. Troy Dayton and Mark Brandel were working with a brand new organization that had just started and had 3 employees called the Marijuana Policy Project. But the stigma that Shay and I sort of ran away from Western New York, where our RIT, was also in DC. So Sean, can you describe your experience moving from traditional politics to becoming an SSDP founder?
Thank you, Chris.
Before doing that, the first thing I want to do is just congratulate everybody in this room for what SSDP has become and what it's going to become. When we sat back and thought about what could be, and we dreamed back in 1997, this is what we dreamed of. So I just want to thank everybody who's here with my deepest, warmest gratitude for all the hard work and everything you've accomplished and everything I know you will accomplish. So thank you. When I first came to DC as a college student in 1997, my mindset and focus was in mainstream politics. I had volunteered for various White House organizations that were visiting Florida prior to that, where I'm from, that were doing essentially campaigning for President Clinton. And then when I came to DC, I began interning in the White House Office of Political Affairs as a college freshman. And this issue of the war on drugs always kind of sparked an interest with me after, when I was younger, seeing a documentary by John Stossel that really hit home on a lot of issues and opened my mind to a lot of questions that I hadn't been asking. And so while I was at the White House, I started asking some of these questions about drug policy. And I would get very odd responses in my mind. There was never actually a discourse or a discussion. Essentially, the conversation would go between, should we get super tough on drugs or super, super tough on drugs? What do you prefer? And there really just wasn't an opportunity to have an open, honest debate, or discussion for that matter, about what was going on in the drug war. So after leaving the White House that summer, I went back home and started doing some research and tried to find some information out for myself. And after doing that research, it became abundantly clear to me that this issue was even worse than I thought it to be, and that something needed to be done. So I started trying to find organizations in Washington, D.C., where I was going to be returning, that were dealing or addressing this issue. And back then, it wasn't as easy to find. There were a variety of different organizations out there, but it was unclear what they stood for. I couldn't figure out if this organization was for drug policy reform or if they were drug prohibitionists, because people were very scared to come out and explain exactly who they were. But one organization in particular had a URL that made it pretty clear to me, stopthedrugwar.org. I was like, this is where I need to go. So I called up the organization and told them who I was, what I wanted to do, and they said, when you get back to DC, come on in. And that's when I met Chris Lottlicker, David Borden, Adam Smith, and that's where everything kind of began. One of my first tasks as an intern there at DRCnet was to write an article for their weekly newsletter that was called The Week Online back then. It's now the Drug War Chronicle. And I called up Senator Bob Graham's office, where I had interned in high school, and thought I'd get their feedback on one of the issues that The Week Online was writing about. When I started having this discussion with a couple staffers, they quickly turned everything around on me, flipped it around, and started questioning me and asking me why I was involved with this organization, what I was doing. Was I crazy? You had interned in our Miami office and with the White House? What are you doing? You're going to ruin your career. And so they really tried to put a scare into me. So I actually took a step back at that point in time, looked back over the research that I had gone into, talked about the issues more deeply with Chris and Dave and Adam, and reaffirmed the fact that, no, this is exactly what I wanted to be doing. And shortly thereafter, Governor Gary Johnson came out for drug legalization. Not more than a week later, we met with him around a big table, and we're on the CBS Evening News that night. So I think the scare tactics and fear-mongering that Senator Bob Graham's office did to me at that point in time was off base, and I think everything we've seen today is a further testament to that.
So at this time, the drug policy reform movement is heating up, but we believe that if we were going to be able to successfully challenge the drug war, we were going to need a student movement to do it. Then Congress threw us a softball. They passed the Higher Education Act of 1998. This, of course, contained a provision that would deny federal financial aid to any student who had a drug offense, even for possession of marijuana. This was the drug war overreach personified, and was taking away someone's college education because they made a mistake in high school. It targeted the constituency we wanted to organize and gave us an opportunity to organize the pro-education community against prohibition. Sean really helped take it to the next level at GW. Sean, can you describe how students who at this point were all working sort of under the name of SSDP on different campuses decided to push back against this law?
Thank you, Chris. As Chris mentioned, I guess softball is a decent way to put it. This law was so obviously horrible. Made no sense, was backwards thinking, and was the easiest tool to organize students who, this was a no-brainer. It was just one where most people that we spoke to it was obvious to them that this was bad policy. So it gave us an opportunity to start talking to them, not only about this issue, but the broader issues. So at the time, there were 5 chapters, along with Dan Goldman and Alex Creed, and we were all starting to communicate online, and we had our first conference in 1999, where we really started taking this issue to the forefront and started passing resolutions on all the various college campuses across the country. Chris mentioned Peter Nelson earlier. He got these resolutions passed at like 13, 14 schools, just driving around in his car and meeting with students and getting non-binding resolutions, but resolutions nonetheless, that indicated that these schools did not want their students being stripped of financial aid. The idea that we have a drug or substance abuse problem in the country and we're going to solve that by denying students an education was just really easy for us to win. And it started creating a lot of media attention. We got recognized in several issues of the Rolling Stone magazine. Jan Wenner donated an ad space to the organization, and everything just started dominoing. We would get one article, and then all of a sudden our phones would light up, and we'd start getting calls from all sorts of media outlets all over the country. So we were really able to take our message nationwide. After leaving GW, I had the honor of serving as co-national director with Brian Gralnick for a period of time, and then as the national director for about 3 years. During that time, I had the honor of working with Daryl Rogers and Carolyn Lundman, who's now Carolyn Rogers, along with many other great activists. And we did everything under the sun to bring attention to not only this issue, but the failed war on drugs as a whole. But one thing in particular that we decided to do was target the author of the law, Representative Mark Souder. This was an individual who, to call him a drug war advocate it does not do him justice. He lived, breathed, and loved the drug war. And this individual was making it his primary purpose to create and pass these draconian laws, and we decided that we were going to stand up against him. So we did a lot of different actions. One in particular, when he was running for re-election, he decided to give a speech at a school about financial aid in his home district in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Well, we thought it was quite hypocritical for him to be going onto a campus, to would-be college students' school, and to talk to them about financial aid without bringing attention to his law, the law that was going to be denying financial aid to so many students, so many of their peers. So we hopped in a van, a big group of us. We met up with other students, picked up other students along the way, and we brought a bunch of TV cameras with them, all the local media, and we confronted him at this speech. And after doing so, we ended up in an on-the-street debate with him for probably a good 20, 30 minutes. It was the lead story in all 3 local affiliates, and it really helped propel the issue. But it also engendered some criticism from some of our opponents. In particular, the president of Drug Free Kids, also former president of that she describes as the former organization that former First Lady Nancy Reagan chaired, put out an op-ed. And in that op-ed, she indicates that the recent verbal attack on Representative Mark Souder by so-called Students for Sensible Drug Policy, who traveled from Indiana, Illinois, and Washington, D.C. to Fort Wayne, was as senseless as illegal drug use is. As far as continuing to shadow the congressman, Carolyn Lundman, an SSDP member from George Washington University, Washington, D.C., said he better watch his back. Students for Sensible Drug Policy is a militant fringe of the drug legalization movement. As parents, we would treat membership in SSDP as firmly as we would treat drug use. Stop the behavior and resign from the group, or you pay for your own tuition. We responded to this article, and I'll spare you all the details, but in one of the passages we indicate, to accuse SSDP of militancy is an absurd accusation, especially coming from an individual who supports the most militant approach to drugs. We are the ones saying put down the guns and please stop pointing them at our youth. You tell me who are the militants. So in the end, this was an extremely successful campaign for us and helped propel the organization into the national forefront.
All right, thanks, Sean. So at this point, we're starting to really figure out that, we got something going on. This thing's, going to make a difference. And we're all trying to assess in our lives, how seriously we want to pursue it and how much, Troy talked about yesterday, how much are you willing to give, to make this happen? I had my reflection moment on this when we were planning our first press conference on HEA. What we were doing is we were doing a press conference at the National Press Club. We were announcing all the schools that had passed the resolutions, and we had just started getting other national orgs like the NAACP and the ACLU, Federal Financial Aid Officers Associations to be, joining on with us. But, one of the things you guys probably know is we were trying to change the perception of who drug legalizers were. We had made a conscious decision that we were all going to always do any public events. We were going to be wearing suits. We started getting the nickname Stoners in Suits. But the problem is that no suit was going to hide the fact that I had 3-foot-long dreadlocks. Real white boy nasty dreadlocks too. So the morning, Adam Smith, basically pulled me aside, and any of the regular listeners of Marijuana Today know Adam, and basically told me that he didn't think it was a good idea for me to come to the press conference, and Sean, generally agreed, even though not so committing to it. So I had to go back that night and really think about, how much was I willing to give up to, and how important was this to me. And now just to start off, I believe everyone has to make their own decisions about their personal aesthetic and what that means to them, and I firmly believe in radical self-expression. But, that next morning I came in and had my suit on, hair cut, looking good, and Adam Smith pulled me aside and he said, "Hey kid, from now on, you can go to all the meetings." So another thing that, Troy, you hit it all at your speed. Another thing that Troy brought up was the internet and the role that was playing in us being able to do organizing for the first time. And, it seems weird, but this was the first time that anyone was connecting with people over and using email and websites and building lists, and that was all really new. And student organizing was ground zero because you would go to events, like at DRC, we would go to events to collect email addresses, and most of the people didn't have an email address. But do you know who had email addresses? Every student, because they were getting .edu email addresses at their school. And this was allowing us to reach out and connect with kids around the country who believed what we believed, but we had never met. So, Dan, how did this influence how you got involved in SSDP?
My freshman year of college, I went to the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and part of the reason I chose that school is because they every year hosted the Great Midwest Marijuana Harvest Festival. As it turns out, you probably shouldn't pick your college based on one weekend event, but but at my first year there, I found a pamphlet that said why DARE is bad for parents, students, police, teachers, schools, and it was written by Chris Conrad, and I just thought it was the most amazing, influential, one-page, folded in half pamphlet that I went and made photocopies and started giving them out to all my friends in the dorm. And on the back of this pamphlet, there was a little website, a URL that said www.drcnet.org/dare. I had no idea what drcnet.org was or what it stood for, but I knew I should probably go check this website out, but I just never remembered to look it up until about a year and a half later at a computer. It was the summer before my junior year of school, and I decided I should probably check out this website I've been meaning to look up for 2 years. And I signed up for the Week Online, the email newsletter, and Adam Smith was writing editorials weekly, and I would read them at the top of the newsletter, and I was like, wow, these guys are so smart, and they have so much going on, and man, I gotta connect with these guys. When I go back to school, I'm gonna start the student organization against the drug war, but I want it to be for something, not against something. And I can't think of a good name. And I go the first day I'm back on campus that year, and I see a sign that says a pot smoker gets arrested every 45 seconds. Join Students for Sensible Drug Policy. And I was like, for sensible drug policy? It's brilliant. So brilliant. So smart. And somebody already filled out the paperwork to start the organization, so I don't even have to do that. I can just show up at the meeting. This is getting so easy. So I go to the student organization fair that year, and I see the table, and Eric Hoganson, who's a political consultant with Hoganson Strategies Group. If any of you run for elected office, he's an awesome direct mail campaigner. Eric was the person who started the chapter, and I got up to the table and I was like, oh, I saw the sign for the meeting on Thursday. I can't wait to come. My name's Dan Goldman. And he says, oh, Dan Goldman. Yeah, I was told to look out for you. And I stepped back, like, who told you to look out for me? How do you know my name? What's going on? How could you possibly know? Like, yo, this organization is some radical NSA, cybersecurity spying on me. And this is 1998. We didn't know any of those words. So I finally dawns on me that I signed up for this email list with my students.wis.edu email address, and that somebody on the other end thought, hey, we're starting a chapter here, and here's some emails. If you happen to see one of these 3 people on campus whose emails we have, these are some people to look out for. Suffice it to say, from that moment on, I have been SSDP to my bones, and it has just been a wonderful, amazing experience to meet all of these people, and 15, 16 years later, meeting all of you, and it all began with signing up for an email list and meeting people because of it.
You know, so Wisconsin would go on to become our 5th founding SSDP chapter, and you know, the internet was just hugely important, enabling us to reach out to kids all around the country and be able to connect for the first time in that way. We decided to have a conference, like Sean said, at George Washington University to get everyone in one place for the first time. It was smaller than this one, you know, somewhere around, you know, maybe over 100 kids. But we went into the conference having about 5 SSDP groups. We came out having 20. The original 5 groups voted to start a new organization. The organization will be run by a student board made up of all students from the chapters. Troy Dayton and Mark Brando were both graduating from American, so Dave Epstein became the first board member from EU. Alex Kripe became the first board member from Hampshire. Sean became the first board member from GW. Chris May, who is the chapter president of RIT, became the board member from RIT. And Jake Davis was representing University of Wisconsin. And they made the very terrific decision to hire me for the first ED for no money whatsoever. You know, the organization was born, life was good, we have a couple dozen chapters. During 2000, we went up to protest and antagonize all the presidential candidates up there. Steve Silverman dressed up in a 8-foot-tall George Bush drug war hypocrite puppet that we would follow him around to campaign events for. MTV actually ended up following us and doing an episode that the network decided was too pro in our favor, so they weren't willing to air it. And Sean also said, you know, the other big boost we really got, at least for our credibility, because, you know, this is really early. When Governor Gary Johnson came out, it was the highest ranking official ever to step forward and say he wanted to see the legalization of all drugs, which, you know, was our position, or very close to our position. The fact that the first thing he did was come to DC, and the first thing he did in DC was sit down with us for 3 hours in the morning and strategize with us of how we were going to build a student movement, you know, that was a big ego boost at that age, to be like, oh, what we're doing is important. It's not just in our heads that, you know, this is going to make a difference. Sean ended up taking over as ED at the end of that year, and you know, I think a big deal is, like, I just want to come back to the Rolling Stone series of articles, you know, on the organization. You know, they were calling us the new anti-war movement. And Sean, can you just describe a little more just the impact the Rolling Stone articles made?
Absolutely. The Rolling Stone articles, when each one of them came out, in terms of hits on the website of students interested in starting chapters, when I say spike, that's an underestimate. It was astronomical, the amount of response we would get from these articles. Phil Zabruski wrote 2 of them, and they were really great, well done articles that really helped explain our position and what we were doing, and really was a catalyst for the growth of our chapter numbers. I mean, getting people in the door is all we really needed to do, because there were so many people out there. This idea was percolating. It was, you know, sitting there in people's minds, but there really wasn't any way or mechanism for them to, and people didn't have apps, and there was there wasn't the same kind of social networking that goes on today. So people picking up this Rolling Stone magazine and seeing this information about the organization was really a boost to getting people to then come onto the web, see us, so that we can get them involved in the network.
So the organization, you know, this is like the Rolling Stone articles is what jumped us up from having dozens of chapters to then getting into the hundreds. And Rolling Stone was like a bigger magazine as far as mindshare people. Like, it was like getting recognized on the street kind of thing, you know, when that came out. And as we grew, we went through a series of other great executive directors. We had Scarlett Swerdlow and Daryl Rogers who served in that role. But the org was getting more professionalized. Every year I was coming back and seeing events and feeling more and more like I didn't fit in because all the kids were really, really smart. And then we, Chris Crane got involved in the org. So Chris, can you talk about how you got involved with SSDP?
Sure. So we'll come back to when I was actually an employee of the org, but it really, it started initially when I was a college student at American University, but back then it was Troy Dayton and Mark Brandel really the ones pushing that chapter forward, David Epstein. I was kind of a younger member, got a little more involved as I got older, and from there I went to go and work at Normal, which, as Shade mentioned, in many ways kind of birthed SSDP by not encouraging him to form a Normal chapter. But I was working there, and I was the chapter coordinator, and that included coordinating a lot of our campus chapters. And Sean and I got very close very quickly because we realized, look, there's a student movement that's happening here, and there are students working on this issue that are beyond just SSDP. My job was to help organize the.
What year is this?
This was about 2002. It's from 2000 to 2006. I was in that role, but it was around 2002 that we really started getting the Normal chapters much more actively involved in the campaigns that were being promulgated by SSDP, particularly the HEA amendments. And so we basically got all the Normal chapters to start doing HEA amendments. It was a total sort of 180 from folks like Keith Stropp. By that point, he was very supportive of Normal. And the movement was able to see by that point that the student movement had grown larger than SSDP, but it was really being led by SSDP. And so there became this really good alliance and really strong alliance between us. This was solidified in an event that we did in 2002, a protest out in Sacramento to protest the sentencing of Brian Epps, who was one of the early forebearers in the medical marijuana industry in California when it was still a dark shade of gray market back then, and he was facing a 10-year mandatory minimum sentence. I'll spare some of the details of that protest. It was in many ways a disaster. But it was the one time I think in our history when when we actually had too much money and not enough time for a project. It was quite incredible. And so Sean calls me up and he's like, hey, I got $40,000 in 2 weeks to throw a protest. We'll give you the next 2 weeks off so you can come to California with me. And me and Daryl Rogers and Mark Brandel, who by that point was the Libertarian Party campus coordinator, all got on a plane to San Francisco, and we did 2 campuses a day, and we were flyering, and didn't really realize that it was like the first week of campus. It was kind of hard for kids to take off and come to a protest in Sacramento. We had a donor who had given us a lot of money, who had a real vision of what he wanted to see in terms of students and patients marching together, and students with their school sweatshirts on and banners of the schools they were at, and again, sparing too many details, but we weren't able to fill the buses the way that we hoped we would. At one point, there was a couple buses that pulled up filled with basically Berkeley street kids who had been promised free meals, which they got, coming out saying, here you go to Stanford, here you go to UC Davis, and they're walking around with their banners. But, there was a lot of lessons on what not to do, but it really solidified this broader student movement between Normal, SSDP, and now the Libertarian Party, and really branching out into SSDP leading what was becoming a real movement.
All right, so as the organization got bigger and our power started to grow, we were becoming more successful, we were pushing legislation, and we were really becoming the representatives of what we thought was the DARE generation, and these were the people that the kids who the drug war was supposed to protect. And, but things were still moving, events would happen and we would have, like Chris said, limited ability to respond as an org. Dan, can you just talk about what happened at Goose Creek and Goose Creek High School?
Yeah, so in 2003, in the middle of the Drug Policy Alliance's International Conference, on Friday morning, everybody wakes up and they turn on the TV in their hotel rooms, and across all the 24-hour cable news channels is surveillance footage of a drug raid of a high school in right outside Charleston, South Carolina, in Goose Creek. And the video showed, cops pointing guns at kids who were kneeling in flexi cuffs, and dogs, barking aggressively at kids just kind of scared in the hallway. And everybody in the drug reform movement internationally kind of looks at SSDP and is like, so what you gonna do? And we're like, ooh, we just hired new staff and they all just moved to Washington and everybody's just getting settled into new jobs and looking for apartments, and nobody's really in a position to drop everything and go to South Carolina to organize a protest. And I was in between jobs, and I was like, I got the time. We were really fortunate that one of our board members, Ian Mance, was from South Carolina, and his family graciously hosted me and gave me a car so I could get around. And as it turns out, in the South, they don't have the public transportation infrastructure I was used to in the Northeast. You need a car. So we went down to Goose Creek, and we worked for 10 days. And I think every drug policy reform organization contributed materials, support in some way. And it really felt every day as I was writing up what happened that we were the tip of the sword leading a direct action response to the latest outrage in the drug war. And it was the first time that SSDP was really in a position to, here's a national outrage, and we can immediately respond with the full force of the drug reform movement behind us. And we organized parents, students, the community to not only get the principal to resign, but to change the district policies that would allow such kind of raids to happen or not happen again in the future.
We're going back to you, Dan. I see you moving that mic. So, we also were starting to deal with the first times we had international presence as an organization in 2004. So, Dan, I just want you to touch on that probably briefly. How was our first organizing effort started?
Ironically, the same funder, Chris and Sean were talking about, decided he wanted to see Canadian versions of SSDP chapters, and the International Narcotic Officer Association was meeting in Canada for the first time. Normally those meetings, yes, represent Canada. They met in Montreal, and we went there for about 10 days and organized on college campuses in Montreal. And compared to the 2002 event, this one was super successful thanks to the work of the students at McGill and Concordia, thank you, and the University of Montreal, and one other francophone school in Montreal that's name escapes me at the moment. University of Quebec, maybe. It was incredible, and out of that experience, we began a network in Canada. Chris traveled in the summer, and I followed up in the fall, and we started chapters from Halifax to British Columbia and Victoria, all across the country. And we're very fortunate to find people who are able to lead a Canadian Students for Sensible Drug Policy, which I'm very happy to say that 10 years later not only exists but thrives as a student voice in the drug policy reform movement throughout Canada. So thank you, Canadian Students for Sensible Drug Policy, for being here and for all your work.
And today SSDP has a presence in almost a dozen countries around the globe. But with success comes change. Chris, can you talk about how eventually pretty much winning on HEA changed the organization?
Sure. So by the time I took over as executive director in 2006, HEA to that point had really been the singular issue that SSDP had been focused on, that we'd organized around. The number one thing that chapters did, as Sean had mentioned, a new chapter, first thing was go get an HEA resolution passed on your campus, and this was really the issue that united us. By the time I took over in 2006, it was fairly clear that HEA reform was on the horizon, on the near-term horizon. We had a lawsuit that we had filed in federal court challenging the constitutionality of that law. We did lose that case, but it did help shine a spotlight on it. And that was around the time when HEA was finally up for reauthorization again, which was, we knew that was going to be the time that we could get some real reform. So I could kind of see, looking down what was going to be my tenure at SSDP, that it was likely that we weren't really going to be able to rely on HEA as our primary organizing tool anymore. And in fact, we did get it scaled back significantly to today, where it only applies to current students who are receiving financial aid or convicted of drug felonies, very different than the retroactivity that was in place when I was there. Scarlett Swerdlow, my predecessor as executive director, had started a program called the Campus Change Campaign, which when I came in, I deeply embraced and saw as this could be the sort of the future of the organization. And the whole idea was let's find a way to train our students to run campaigns on their campuses that will train them to become the leaders in drug policy reform when they graduate from school, and also to start movements at the campus level that will bubble up to the state level. In running these campaigns, and these included things like Good Samaritan policy, which really took on a life of its own. It started on the campus, and now it's actually taking place in states all around the country. That's very much started with SSDP chapters. chapters in the mid-2000s, to things like equalizing marijuana and alcohol penalties on campus, to reducing marijuana penalties on campus, to drug education centers and so forth. But the whole idea was, let's give students an opportunity to write letters to the editor, meet with their editorial board, lobby their student government, lobby their student administration, run for student government, all of the types of things that you would need to do in municipal and state government if you want to run a successful campaign in your state. And so that really became a large focus of the organization for the next few years, and one of the ways that we were able to stay relevant beyond changes in HEA that would no longer make it the driving organizing tool for the organization.
You know, and I really like Campus Change for SSDP because I feel like it keeps us rooted in doing things to reduce the impact of the drug war on people right now, improving people's lives right now. I feel like a lot of times we can get caught up into effective changing laws that are going to affect the future, that are going to help these intangible masses sometime, someday. And I feel like SSDP has been always about changing lives right now. And I also want to bring up one of the other orgs that sort of grew out with us, which was the Flex Your Rights organization. You know, it's the leading national organization for asserting your Fourth Amendment rights, but it really grew out of SSDPers wanting to reduce the harms of the drug war right now by getting less people arrested and convicted. And, you know, Flex Your Rights really started with Steve Silverman and Scott Morgan, you know, doing presentations on those rights at SSDP chapters. So Chris, I want to talk about one other thing. You know, winning HEA was, you know, probably the big long-term victory for us during your tenure. But can you talk about how a kid in Alaska ended up fully legitimizing SSDP?
Yeah, so this is a case that I don't know how many of you are familiar with today, but it was a Supreme Court case affectionately known as the Bong Hits for Jesus case. This came about because of a kid in Alaska when the Olympic torch was, this was for the Salt Lake Games, the 2002 Games, was passing through Juneau, Alaska, I believe it was. This kid and his friends, as the they were let out of school, they all went across the street as the parade was going by, and they unfurled this giant banner that said, "Bong Hits for Jesus." And they did so, admittedly, because they wanted to get on TV, which they did. Well, the school didn't like that. They called them into the principal's office. They all got suspended. The one kid who pressed it quoted Thomas Jefferson to defend his free speech rights, so they added on a couple extra weeks to suspension for doing that. And this case worked its way all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, which, you know, to most casual observers seemed like a really silly thing, right? To defend the right of a kid to say "Bong Hits for Jesus," who knew what that really meant. And the government interpreted this as, you know, they're promoting drug use on campus. Well, they weren't actually on campus. That was a whole other issue. But what wound up happening was the government argued in their briefs that schools should have the right to punish students for not just advocating drug use on campus, but also for advocating for drug policy reform or marijuana legalization. And that's where we really had an issue. I mean, if the government won in that case, or the standard they were arguing, students could be punished just for starting an SSDP chapter, particularly in their high schools. So we activated our network in a few different ways. Number one, we worked with Alex Kreit, who was a SSDP alum by this point, was a well-respected attorney with a major firm in San Francisco, and they wrote a legal brief that we filed at the Supreme Court. And we could see the tea leaves. We knew that the court, with the makeup of the court, was going to prohibit, or at least allow schools to punish students for promoting drug use. And so we narrowly focused our arguments on the rights of students to promote drug policy reform and talk about legalization. We also activated our grassroots network, and we got a small grant from the Drug Policy Alliance. We brought a bunch of students to DC, and we protested outside the Supreme Court the morning of the case. And we had about 30 students come out and unfurl a giant banner with the same exact typeface as the original banner, which was the picture in the media, that said "Free Speech for Students," and really tried to change the public perception of this case from some silly case about bong hits to a real case about the rights of students to speak freely about drug policy and drug policy reform. The next day, that night online, and the next day in the papers, all of the imagery of this case were our kids holding the "Free Speech for Students" banner. It was no longer the "Bong Hits for Jesus" banner. And that helped shape the media coverage, and ultimately the Supreme Court did say that administrators and teachers could punish students for promoting drug use, but they carved out a very explicit exemption for the rights of students to promote drug policy reform, marijuana legalization, and other politically unpopular positions. And I think that was a large result of SSDP in a grassroots way changing the narrative and changing the public imagery of this case, and also the SSDP alumni network actually writing the legal brief and making that argument before the Supreme Court.
You know, so in many ways that case was sort of a bookend, you know, to a key part of our founding. That when we started SSDP, we were told we couldn't meet on campus because we promoted drug use. Other individualists was pressured by, you know, political contacts they had that this was going to be career ending. And it was really great to have we had to take it all the way to Supreme Court, but they laid down that in Alaska, if the kid's banner had said legalize drugs, not bong hits for Jesus, he would have been protected. Also, for those who don't know, Tom Angel was media coordinator at SSDP at this time. Tom now runs Marijuana Majority. And is a Marijuana Today regular. And if you know, Tom has, you know, done multiple media stunts and efforts to bring a lot of attention to this movement. He's probably quoted a couple times a week every day in the media. Getting the front page to change the picture and move it over to our narrative was really one of Tom's first masterpieces. So, you know, he learned that, you know, at SSDP. You know. So now as we move forward in the organization, we actually now have a chapter network that's developed around the country, and we're pulling in the best and brightest and finding all the smartest folks who want to be involved in the organization. So Shalene, can you talk about how you got involved in SSDP?
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear you guys talking about what a deliberate decision it was to cut off the dreadlocks and put on the suit. Thank you. Because that marketing indirectly brought me into the organization in an interesting way. When I first started, I was quite casual about our chapter. I co-founded it with my best friend, Danielle Schumacher, at the University of Illinois. And it was a normal / SSDP chapter. At the time, I didn't know there was a difference. And so I told Danielle, okay, I'll be the treasurer, I'll do the funding applications, I might go to the parties once in a while, but I don't want to do a lot of work. I'm a very serious accounting student, and this is one of many clubs, so I'll just help out a little bit. That was our deal. So she went to a regional SSDP conference for the first time in Chicago, and she came back and I said, oh, hey, how was your pot conference? And she said, that was not a pot conference. They were all wearing suits, and they were really serious. And they were talking about legalizing all drugs, and they're really serious about it. Really serious. So my curiosity was piqued because this was a time when drug policy was not seen as a serious issue as much as it is now. Nobody really talked about mass incarceration. No one talked about privilege. No one talked about the crack cocaine disparity the way they do now. And so I was so interested that I attended a conference almost with the reaction of, who do these guys think they are in suits, you know, running around talking about legalizing heroin. I got to see this. So I went to my first conference, and I met possibly the most dynamic person I've ever met in my life, Chris Crane, and he started talking about campus change. And like everyone there, and possibly all of you, if it's your first conference, you can probably relate. I was deeply moved and so inspired to create change, not just on my campus, but beyond. And so we went back. One of our first events that we held at the University of Illinois was called Forgiveness Weekend. It was Danielle's idea, and we partnered with our local churches in central Illinois, and we invited everyone that we could that either had a drug conviction or knew someone in a family of someone who had a drug conviction. And it was called Forgiveness Weekend because the theme was, if you have a drug conviction, that shouldn't ruin your life, and what can we do to change that? So once I got a taste of that coalition building, I was hooked, and SSDP for life for me now.
So after Chris left SSDP as executive director, Micah Daigle took on that role. The organization, you know, continued to build and grow. And we got really lucky because, you know, we got connected with a girl from University of Maryland. And Stacia, can you describe how you got involved in SSDP?
Sure. I'll give you guys the abridged version. But when I was in high school, I was just like involved in extracurriculars, and so when I knew I was going to University of Maryland, I looked up the student groups that they had. I saw SSDP and Normal, and I was like, hey, I think marijuana's pretty cool. That sounds like a fun club for me. And I emailed Victor Pinho, and I actually looked up that email recently from my Yahoo account. Was just like, hi, I can't wait to be a part of your club. And Victor's like, okay, yeah, cool. You should come here when you're like a student. And so I was so excited to go to my first SSDP and Normal meeting. It was the first day of my freshman year. Was really psyched to be there. Was just a regular chapter member. Volunteered, did tabling, stuff like that for my whole first semester. And then I had a very unfortunate police encounter involving less than half a gram of marijuana in my dorm room, and it completely changed everything for me. I mean, I cared about this issue before, but it really, catalyzed my involvement. I wouldn't have been able to make it through such a difficult experience without Victor and the SSDP staff. I saw that Chris Crane and Dan Goldman had responded to Victor and Damien when they were like, hey, there's this girl, she got arrested, we need to help her. And they're like, oh, well, here's everything we have. Let's find her a lawyer, let's get this done. So that arrest really catalyzed me into becoming a leader within SSDP. And this is the first time that I was offered a leadership position, was as the chapter president that semester. And SSDP just kept offering me leadership roles, and I just kept saying, all right.
SSDP is an organization where you can start as a member of a chapter and you can go on to fill any role in the organization. All of our board chairs have always been chapters, and the student chapter leaders have gone on to be the executive director 4 times at the org. Now, Stacia, you're the quintessential SSDPer now, meaning that you've served in all the roles of the organization. Can you take a little bit of time to describe the different parts of the orgs, the staff, the board, the ED, the alumni, the chapters, and how they all interrelate?
Absolutely. So like Chris said, I have served every role that is available in this organization, from chapter member, chapter president, a national unpaid intern in the national office. I got elected to the board of directors. I became vice chair on the board of directors. I was hired as entry-level outreach director, promoted to associate director, then deputy director, then interim executive director for a time, and now I'm back to my rightful place as deputy director now that we have hit the jackpot with Betty Aldworth. Yes, let's kick it off. So I've, really had a unique experience in being able to see this organization from all of those different perspectives. And, SSDP is a grassroots organization, and we really mean that. And so we exist to serve our students, our staff. Their full-time job is to support our students and our alumni network. And then we, of course, have the board of directors, which is comprised of students, overseeing the executive director and the staff to ensure that the big picture SSDP strategy lines up with what you guys care about and what you guys are working on and what you guys need. We just basically exist to serve you guys.
I don't think I can overemphasize how big a role the student board plays in the organization. They have always been the ones that made the tough calls. All of us who started the org went on and have been doing different things. It's the continuing having the board of directors that are from the students that have kept us alive all these years. And there's a joke about adding to your resume, I survived the SSDP board, because it's a challenging, time-intensive role for no pay and little fanfare. But it's where we're building leaders who are going to end up ending the drug war. Shalene, can you describe your experience being on the board and the challenges you chose to deal with there?
Yeah, I never ran for board when I was a student because I was so busy getting an accounting degree that I would never use. So I served as an appointed director from 2010 to 2013. And when you really love an organization and you're really committed to it, I think a big part of that is trying to improve where there's room for improvement. And hopefully it won't come as a huge shock to anyone in this room that our movement, including SSDP, has room for improvement when it comes to diversity, racial diversity, gender diversity, and getting women and people of color and people from marginalized communities not just in the movement, but in leadership positions and high-level positions as entrepreneurs and up here on these stages. So SSDP has a really unique committee that is working on those efforts called the ORD, Outreach, Recruitment, and Diversity Committee. Some of you may have gone to their event last night. Some of you are scholarship recipients. And it's a very interesting committee because it is comprised of both board members and non-board members. Typically, the way that a committee is created is the board creates it and puts board members on it. But this committee was created spontaneously at a conference in 2011 by Rodrigo Vasquez, goes by Froggy. He came to the conference for his first time from LA City College, and he was expecting, based on the cause and the subject matter, that he would see all kinds of people here with former drug convictions, perhaps former addicts, formerly incarcerated people, and he was expecting to see a lot more diversity in the panels. And when he didn't, he was sort of shocked, and he started bringing it up to people in the evening at the conference venue. And as you've seen at conferences, when something interesting is going on or a conversation is going on, people walking by will stop and join. And so what happened was people kept stopping and talking to Froggy about this and sharing their ideas, including myself, until there were 20 or 30 people on the floor, sitting cross-legged in a circle at the Fun Dome, sharing ideas for what can be done at the national level and at the chapter level to help increase diversity. And we had an amazing conversation, and when we had to wrap it up, we decided that we would make this pact, that we would keep it going by having a closed Facebook group, which still exists, to continue the conversation, and to have a series of phone calls to discuss what measures we could take to try and address this. So we stuck to that pact, and a lot of ideas came up in these phone calls. But the thesis that came out of it was that SSDP is the future of the movement and the industry as well. And so if we can make progress, then a few years later means everyone else gets to make progress too. And how did we want to do that? Well, we thought the best way would be to get people to the conference, because that's how we all got engaged. And so we decided we need to find the people that we want to recruit in SSDP, and we want to get them to the conference. That was our goal. So we started a scholarship fund. It's still around. Some of you are those scholarship recipients. And at the time, none of us were experienced fundraisers at all, so we were bringing in donations, $5, $10, $15, $20. I threw a party, and I went through my house and just picked up whatever looked cool, like some books, some jewelry, and I said, everyone come over to my house, $5 a raffle ticket. You guys can all just take it. That was the level at which we were fundraising. We're very, very committed people. Tom Silverstein, too, Irina Alexander, and Froggy Vasquez, and Julie Roberts as well. And we ended up raising enough for 25 scholarship recipients that year, as well as SSDP's first anti-oppression workshop. Small victory, small victory. But I'll fast forward today, but I just want to address, in terms of the challenges that you asked about, I think it's very, very common in a nonprofit that does social justice that when you're trying to make internal improvements, there's a sense sometimes we're the good guys. Why are you after us? Or why are you trying to distract from whatever the big thing is that moment? If you work at a nonprofit, there's always some crisis or some campaign or some difficulty. But those are the times when we need diversity the most to tackle those issues. We faced a little bit of that, and I think we still do, but I just want to fast forward to today, and I just want to congratulate the whole staff, including Seisha, who's been doing so much for this issue since then. Northwestern University that held a phenomenal panel today on privilege and the war on drugs. And the people who are running that committee now, Kat Murthy, Jess Cochran, and Sarah Arnold. Please give them a hand for making this a priority.
You know, with the growing industry now, you know, this is more important than ever. SSDP is continuing to evolve. You know, we're the talent pipeline for the entire drug policy reform movement. You know, at some points I feel like half of all the jobs in drug policy are filled by SSDPers, which is really building cohesion in the movement as well, because we've all known each other for so long, and we can really figure out a lot of strategy together without always having to be so conflictual. We also have a chance to define the values and the goals of where things are going to be going in the future, because things are changing pretty fast. Stacia, can you talk about how things have changed since we won in Colorado and in Washington in 2012?
Sure. Well, you know, I mean, in addition to the public winds of support being as in their favor as they have ever been, in many of our times being involved, SSDP too is in a really important time of growth and change. As you guys know, we transitioned executive directors, obviously, last year. We, you know, have had a lot of staff transition. Our staff right now is the biggest it has ever been in the history of SSDP, and that's a really exciting time for us. We are working on lots of new exciting programs, the formalized Alumni Association, career services, intern program. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Campus campaign, lots of internal structure, lots of really, really boring stuff that is really important for, you know, organizations to they're this big and complex to really operate as a well-oiled machine. Is that what you're talking about?
Thank you. So let me bring this in for the landing. You know, when we started SSDP, we were told that we couldn't meet on campus because we were promoting drug use. And we had to take that all the way to the Supreme Court for them to step in and insert our First Amendment rights. They tried to take away the education of drug offenders, and we pushed back on that law and pushed the proponents of that law out of Congress. They told us we would never be able to get jobs, and now SSDP has a jobs fair and a career center. Legalization was considered a pipe dream, and now it exists today in the country, and most of the country thinks it's inevitable. It's only been 16 years, and I feel like we're just getting started, and we got a lot of places to go, but I guess that's up to folks in this room. So Sean, you got a few more quick remarks before we bring it to end for finishing moves?
Actually, mine could be part of the finishing moves.
All right, so you know, we normally on Marijuana Today do a segment called Finishing Moves, which is where we sort of get the sound off on something that the panelists care about. It's their sort of open mic moment. I guess I'll let Sean have an open mic on this, but what I really want to do is if we can just roll through real quick. We all talked about a bunch of folks. You know, we're going to be recording this, putting it on the internet for posterity. I just want to really give us all a chance to just do one last round of name drops, because I hate to leave anyone out. I know we're leaving probably 3-4 dozen awesome, super important people, so I apologize in advance. But Shay, what's your finishing move?
Well, I'm probably forgetting a couple of people, but I just wanted to give a shout out to the founding officers of the group that became SSDP. So Mike Eck is our friend. He actually came up with the name SSDP, so I'll let him live in as legend. Davis Terrell, John Paul Hess, Amy Conklin, Chris was my treasurer, Dan Hayden, Scott Devlin, and me.
All right, Sean, what's your finishing move?
Thank you, Chris. Again, just wanted to thank everybody, and wanted to kind of bring it back to HEA a little bit and recognize, I know we've discussed Alex Creed a number of times throughout the session, but he took the campaign to another level by starting to get college presidents on board with opposing the law, and he was able to get his college president as the first one to sign on board to the college president resolution. He also got his school to be the first school to institute a loan replacement program or scholarship program for those who lost their aid, and then went ahead and had a conference for financial aid administrators at Hampshire College to help those financial aid administrators institute similar programs on their campus. And during that conference, Dave Borden and I had the honor of handing out the first John W. Perry Scholarship Award to a recipient who had lost his financial aid, which leads me to the biggest shout out I want to give on this last shout out opportunity to Marissa Garcia. For those of you who know her, she is a tireless advocate for both drug policy and HEA reform. Not being here today or over this weekend is terribly hurtful to her. She's very sad and depressed that she's not here. But we know she's here in spirit, and she wanted nothing more than to be here with us. And Marissa was a victim of the HEA drug provision. She lost her aid as a result to receiving a ticket after being an officer had noticed a marijuana pipe with residue in her car, and she thought that was the beginning and end of it, and unfortunately it wasn't. She lost her aid as a result of that incident, but Marissa decided not to be a victim and instead became an activist and a voice for the movement. And she has appeared in many news programs and stories. The Rolling Stone articles we've talked so much about, she was one of the main features in those stories. And she also testified to the American Bar Association, among other things. And Marissa definitely represents everything good about somebody who's been hit by one of these laws and then turns around and makes it an important and primary mission to help make sure that what injustice she faced wasn't faced by others. And for that, I'd like to thank Marissa. And final shout outs to Brian Grolnick, Daryl Rogers, Carolyn Rogers, Nicole Giaro, all the Robert Sharp, all the SSDPers back in the day at GW, and everybody here today. Thank you.
All right, we're rolling quick. Goldman, what's your finishing move?
You know, we all stand on the shoulders of giants, every single one of us here. So for my finishing move, I want to, first of all, echo Sean's shout out to Robert Sharp. For those of you who don't know, back in a time when people still read newspapers, the letter to the editor section in the newspaper was the most read page of any newspaper. And one person in this country printed more letters to the editor about drug war stories in newspapers than anybody else. And I really like Robert Sharp to stand up and take a round of applause. Woo! At a time before Google alerts, you could just do keywords. Map Inc. was a repository for drug war stories that people would find in their local media, email the URL and story to a central location, which would then distribute it to activists across the country who could then write letters to the editor back in there. And as a undergraduate, seeing my name in print in the Houston Chronicle and other newspapers around the country, one of the bigger thrills I had. Just want to say, as one of the first non-student board members at SSDP, I want to give a shout out to the other non-student board members who started the tradition of not just having student activist leaders on the board of directors. So Sanho Tree from the Institute for Policy Studies, Chuck Thomas from Marijuana Policy Project, and Valerie Vandepan, who was with DRCnet and is now the editor-in-chief of the Alt Weekly in Detroit. So SSDPers go on to great histories. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank the people who were in my chapter in the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Without them, I would be nowhere. Jake Davis, Eric Hoganson, who founded the chapter, PJ Salomon, who wrote the cover for the first regional conference while he was studying abroad. He's an artist who designed the cover. And without the people in our chapters, you know, it's wonderful to be on the board. It's wonderful to have these opportunities to participate at higher levels. But at the end of the day, it's the people that we work with every day in our chapters who become our closest friends for life. And without them, we're nowhere. So thank you for everybody, and thank you all for coming here.
Chris Crane, finishing move.
All right. Before I get into the shout out to the finishing move, I want to recognize the tremendous and important transition I think we've seen in this organization, and Shalene in particular has I think a lot to do with that, with the work she's done on ORD. I think it's telling if you look at the panel up here. We're the past of this organization. The old white guys. This is the future of the organization here. These folks, Betty, Amanda Muller, these tremendous women that are now taking the organization into the future, and it's incredible to see. This was hard to imagine 15 years ago, and it's hard to imagine it not happening now. So thank you, and please a round of applause for the folks here. So I want to recognize a few folks for my finishing move. I got a bunch of them here, so thankfully I talk fast. But Trevor Stutz, Nathaniel Leps, Matt Polewski, Tom Angel, Jesse Stout, that whole Rhode Island contingent who was responsible for legalizing medical marijuana in Rhode Island. Alison Grimmer, the first female board chair of the organization during my tenure at the helm here. Craig Selkin, who was a plaintiff in our HEA case. Chris Mulligan, who was my partner in nonviolent crime back at Normal, an SSDP board member and a lobbyist on HEA reform. George Pappas, who was my first board chair, who really did a lot, along with the last person I'm going to mention, to help professionalize the board of directors. Started the first strategic planning retreat, again, along with the last person I'll mention. Morgan Lesko, Irene Alexander, Victor Pinho, Damian Nichols, the whole Stacia, the entire UMD crew that's been such an amazingly active chapter for so long. Tom Angel, Micah Daigle, Dan Goldman, Brandy Doyle, Jacob Rowland, John Perry, Stacia, Tyler Smith, Amber Langston, Jenny Loeb, all the people that worked with me on staff the years that I was there. You all are incredible. And lastly, Jennifer Janacek, and I see you in the back there. Please come on in. Come back in. Jenny, for those who don't know, is my wife, but we met as part of SSDP. She was a member of the board of directors when I was there. She was very much in line to be the first female board chair of the board of directors and essentially declined to do it because it probably wouldn't have been appropriate for the board chair to be dating the executive director. She sacrificed the ability to make history in the organization for our relationship. She sacrificed so much in raising our two kids in terms of her own career and ongoing involvement in the organization, and she did so much to help professionalize this organization. So I love you, Jenny. You're an unsung hero of SSDP, and I hope everybody recognizes that.
Shalene, what's your finishing move?
Jenny was on my list too now. You took that. I want to mention some of those people in suits in Chicago that scared my roommate so much. Matt Atwood, George Pappas, Jenny Janacek Crane, Kathy Kane Willis, and also some people from Missouri that came to that first forgiveness weekend, Amber Langston and Josh Capel. They were such nerds, and I was like, oh, these are my people. I love these guys. And then I'm so surprised his name hasn't been mentioned yet. He wasn't on my list because I thought everyone else would mention him, but Eric Sterling.
Yeah. Our longest serving board member. Our longest serving board member.
Right, longest serving board member. And then a couple other mentors that I just want to thank because you really take time out of a really, really busy schedule to mentor so many people. Betty Aldworth, Chris Crane, Chris Lotley-Carr, Neil Franklin, Brian Vicente, Christian Cederberg, and Jack Cole. And your mentees, we're all trying so hard to pay it forward.
Stacey Kostner, what's your finishing move?
Man, everybody's literally taken every single name on my list. So I won't repeat any of those, but I will just say that, you know, SSDP is nothing without you guys and students right now, people who have paved the way for us, alums, professionals, our donors. We need every single one of you to make this organization run. It's been just such a tremendous honor and a privilege serving this wonderful organization, and I just thank you so much for letting me be a part of it. And let's end this drug war.
All right, that is all for this episode of Marijuana Today. The music for the show is provided by Overclock Remix with tracks from Big Giant Circle. You can find us online at shoutengine.com/Marijuana Today or for searching for Marijuana Today on iTunes. Or you could really just go and type Marijuana Today into Google and you'll probably find it that way too. We always love feedback, so you can send us emails at mjtodaypodcast@gmail.com, or you could hit us up on Twitter at mjtodaypodcast. I expect all the SSDPers here to do an old man with some gray hair a favor and go on and rate our show on iTunes. I hope you all enjoyed this super special episode of Marijuana Today and have a wonderful marijuana tomorrow.